Welcome to True.
Across Enemy Lines, a World War II Romance, Part 1, The Occupation. The spring of 1945 arrived in Bavaria with a gentleness that seemed to mock the destruction surrounding it. Apple blossoms drifted through the air like snow, settling on rubble-strewn streets and the charred skeletons of buildings. In the small town of Rothenburg, nestled in the Franconian countryside, the war had finally ended, but its aftermath was only beginning. Greta Hoffman stood at the window of her family's partially damaged house, watching American soldiers set up camp in the town square. At 23, she had survived 6 years of war, the death of her father on the Eastern Front, and the gradual disintegration of everything she had known. Her blonde hair, which she kept pinned back severely, had lost its luster from years of poor nutrition. Her blue eyes, once bright with dreams of becoming a teacher, now reflected a weariness beyond her years. "They're here to stay," her mother said from behind her, voice flat with resignation. Frau Hoffmann had aged a decade in the past year alone, her face lined with worry and grief. "At least the fighting is over," Greta replied softly. She watched as soldiers unloaded trucks, their movements efficient and purposeful. Some were laughing, sharing cigarettes, their faces young and relatively untroubled compared to the haggard German survivors emerging from their homes. The Americans had occupied Rothenburg for 3 weeks now, and an uneasy peace had settled over the town. The soldiers distributed food, established order, and began the slow process of denazification. For the German civilians, especially the women, it was a time of profound uncertainty. The men were dead, imprisoned, or missing. The economy had collapsed. Survival meant adapting to a new reality where yesterday's enemies were today's providers and protectors. Greta had found work as a translator at the American headquarters, a position that brought both relief and shame. Her English, learned from her grandmother who had lived in London before the First War, was excellent. It provided her family with extra rations and a small salary paid in American scrip. But it also marked her as a collaborator in the eyes of some townspeople, though most were too desperate to judge. It was in this capacity that she first truly noticed Lieutenant James Morrison. He was 26, tall and lean, with dark hair and thoughtful brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. Unlike some of his fellow soldiers who treated the Germans with open contempt or predatory interest, Morrison maintained a professional courtesy that surprised Greta. He was from Ohio, she learned, a small farming town not unlike Rothenburg. He had been a schoolteacher before the war, which perhaps explained his more measured approach to the occupation. "Miss Hoffman," he said one morning as she arrived at headquarters, a converted hotel that had survived the bombings. "I need your help with something delicate." She followed him to his office, a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a map of the region on the wall. He gestured for her to sit. "We're trying to locate displaced persons," he explained. "Refugees, concentration camp survivors, forced laborers. Many don't speak English, and my German is, well, let's say inadequate." Greta nodded. She had seen the survivors passing through town, skeletal figures in striped uniforms, their eyes haunted by horrors she could barely imagine. The shame of what her country had done weighed heavily on her, a burden that grew heavier with each revelation of the camp's true nature. "I'll help however I can," she said quietly. Over the following weeks, Greta spent hours working alongside Morrison, interviewing survivors, recording their stories, trying to reunite families torn apart by the war. The work was emotionally exhausting, but it felt like a form of penance, a small way to atone for Germany's sins. Morrison, she discovered, was a man of unexpected depth. He spoke to the survivors with genuine compassion, never rushing them, always patient with their trauma. During breaks, he would talk to Greta about his life before the war, his students, his love of literature, his hope to return to teaching once his service ended. "What did you do before?" he asked her one afternoon as they walked back from interviewing a Polish family. "I was training to be a teacher," Greta said, "but the war interrupted everything." "You would have been good at it," Morrison said. "You're patient, thorough, you actually listen to people." The compliment, simple as it was, touched something in Greta that had been dormant for years. In a world where she felt constantly judged, as a German, as a woman of a defeated nation, as someone trying to survive, his recognition of her humanity was profound. But she was also aware of the dangerous waters they were navigating. Fraternization between American soldiers and German women was officially discouraged, though in practice it happened constantly. Some relationships were purely transactional, women trading companionship for food and protection. Others were genuine connections forged in the crucible of war's aftermath, and still others were predatory, soldiers taking advantage of desperate women who had no one to protect them. Greta had no intention of becoming involved with an American soldier. The shame would be unbearable, and the practical complications were enormous. Yet she found herself looking forward to her days working with Morrison, found herself lingering in conversations with him, found herself noticing the way he ran his hand through his hair when he was thinking, or the slight smile that appeared when he read something amusing in a letter from home. Part 2. Unexpected Connections. Summer arrived, bringing warmth and the slow, painful process of reconstruction. The town began to recover its rhythms, though nothing would ever be as it was. Gardens were planted, shops reopened, children, who had known nothing but war, began to play in the streets again, though their games often involved soldiers and bombs rather than cowboys and Indians. Greta's relationship with Morrison remained professional, but an undercurrent of something more ran beneath their interactions. She told herself it was simply gratitude for his kindness, respect for his character. But in her honest moments, usually late at night when sleep eluded her, she admitted it was more than that. The turning point came in early July. Greta was walking home from headquarters one evening, carrying a small package of coffee and sugar Morrison had given her from the American supplies, a gesture he made occasionally for all the German staff, ensuring they had a little extra to help their families. The sun was setting, painting the damaged buildings in shades of gold and amber, almost making them beautiful again. 3 young men stepped out from an alley, blocking her path. She recognized them: Hans Schroeder, Friedrich Müller, and Klaus Weber. All in their early 20s, all formerly in the Wehrmacht, now returned from POW camps bitter and angry. "Look at the American whore," Hans said, his voice thick with contempt, "trading herself for coffee and chocolate." Greta's face burned. "I'm working as a translator, nothing more. You think we don't see you?" Friedrich moved closer, smiling at them, speaking their language. "You're a traitor to your own people." "My people started a war that killed millions," Greta said, her voice shaking but defiant. "My people built camps where they murdered innocents. If helping to clean up that mess makes me a traitor, then I'm proud to be one." Klaus grabbed her arm roughly. "You need to learn some respect. Let her go." The voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. Morrison appeared from around the corner, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. Another soldier, Sergeant Davis, stood beside him. The German men released Greta immediately, stepping back. Morrison's eyes were hard as he looked at them. "Miss Hoffman works for the United States Army," he said in careful German. "Anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally. Is that clear?" The 3 men muttered and slunk away into the gathering darkness. Morrison turned to Greta, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "Come on, I'll walk you home." They walked in silence for several minutes, the evening air cool and fresh. Greta was acutely aware of Morrison's presence beside her, the careful distance he maintained to avoid impropriety, yet the protectiveness implicit in his accompaniment. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that," he said finally. "The anger, I understand it in a way. They've lost everything: their country, their pride, their sense of who they are. But taking it out on women who are just trying to survive is cowardice." "It's not your fault," Greta said. "And you're right, they have lost everything. We all have. The Germany we knew is gone. We're trying to figure out how to live in this new world, and some handle it better than others." They reached her house, a modest 2-story building with a damaged roof that had been temporarily patched. Morrison paused at the gate. "Greta," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for you, for your courage, your integrity, your willingness to face difficult truths about your country. That takes real strength." She looked up at him, surprised by the emotion in his voice. In that moment, standing in the fading light, she saw in his eyes what she had been afraid to acknowledge, that his feelings mirrored her own, that this connection between them was real and deep and terrifying in its implications. "James," she said softly, testing his name on her tongue. Don't," he said gently. "Don't say anything right now. I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is impossible, but I needed you to know how I feel." He tipped his cap to her and walked away, leaving Greta standing at her gate, her heart pounding, her mind reeling with possibilities she had forbidden herself to consider. Part 3. Growing Closer. The next morning, Greta arrived at headquarters determined to maintain strict professionalism. What Morrison had said, or almost said, couldn't happen. The barriers between them were too great. She was German, he was American. She was of a defeated nation, he was of the victors. Any relationship would be fraught with shame, judgment, and practical impossibilities. But maintaining distance proved harder than she anticipated. Morrison seemed to have made the same resolution, addressing her formally, keeping their interactions focused on work. Yet there were moments, a shared glance, when a particularly pompous officer made a ridiculous statement, the brush of fingers when they both reached for the same document, the way he always saved her an apple from his rations that revealed the current still running between them. Her mother noticed the change in her. "You're different lately," Frau Hoffmann said one evening, as they prepared their meager dinner. "You smile more. You have a lightness I haven't seen in years." Greta felt her cheeks warm. "The work is going well. I feel like I'm helping people." Her mother gave her a long, knowing look. "Is it just the work, or is there a particular American officer who has caught your attention?" "Mama, I'm not judging you, Greta." Her mother's voice was surprisingly gentle. "These are strange times. The old rules, the old ways, they don't quite fit anymore. If you've found someone kind, someone decent in all this chaos, that's not a bad thing." "It's impossible," Greta said, her voice breaking slightly. "What future could we have? When his service ends, he'll go back to America. I'll be here. And even if I wanted to go with him, can you imagine? A German war bride? I'd be hated there as much as I'd be despised here for leaving." "Maybe," her mother acknowledged. "But maybe love is worth fighting for, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Your father and I, we had our share of troubles, but I never regretted choosing him, even now, even with how it ended." Greta felt tears prick her eyes. She missed her father terribly, his quiet strength, his gentle humor, his love of books, and long walks in the countryside. He had been a good man caught up in terrible circumstances, forced to serve in a war he hadn't wanted, dying for a cause he hadn't believed in. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "Then don't do anything yet," her mother advised. "Let things unfold as they will. The heart knows its own path, even when the mind can't see the way, and the opportunity for things to unfold came sooner than Greta expected. A week later, Morrison asked her to accompany him to a nearby village, where a group of orphaned children needed to be interviewed and processed. The drive took them through countryside that was beginning to recover its beauty, fields being replanted, livestock grazing, nature reclaiming ground that war had scarred. They worked through the afternoon, speaking with the children, recording their information, trying to determine if any surviving relatives could be found. It was heartbreaking work. These children, some as young as 5, had lost everything, yet they showed remarkable resilience, clinging to small joys, finding ways to play and laugh despite their trauma. As the sun began to set, Morrison and Greta prepared to return to Rothenburg, but the jeep wouldn't start. After several attempts and much cursing, Morrison admitted defeat. "Looks like we're stuck here for the night," he said, running his hand through his hair, in that gesture Greta had come to recognize. "I'll radio back to headquarters. There's an inn in the village that survived the fighting. We can stay there and get this fixed in the morning." The inn was a charming building with flower boxes in the windows, and a proprietor who was delighted to have American business. She showed them to 2 small rooms at the top of the stairs, served them a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and beer, and then discreetly left them alone. They ate at a small table by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. The beer was warm and slightly sour, the bread dense and dark, but after years of near starvation, it seemed like a feast. "Tell me about Ohio," Greta said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Tell me about your home." Morrison smiled, and for the next hour, he painted pictures with his words, of rolling farmland and small towns where everyone knew everyone, of county fairs and high school football games, of his students and their dreams, of his family's farm where he had grown up helping his father with the harvest. It sounds peaceful, Greta said wistfully, like a different world from all of this. It is. And it isn't. Morrison leaned back in his chair. We have our own problems, our own prejudices. It's not perfect, but it's home, and I miss it, though. He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Though lately I've been wondering what home really means, if it's just a place, or if it can be something more, someone more. Greta's heart raced. James. I know all the reasons this is impossible, he said quickly. Believe me, I've listed them to myself 100 times. But I can't stop thinking about you, Greta. I can't stop admiring your strength, your intelligence, your courage. I can't stop wanting to know everything about you, your favorite book, how you take your coffee, what you dream about when you let yourself dream. She stood up, moving to the window, her emotions in turmoil. Do you know what would happen if we were to... She couldn't even finish the sentence. I would be called a Ami Liebchen, an American sweetheart. It's not a term of affection, it's an insult, a brand of shame. Women have had their heads shaved for less. Morrison came to stand beside her, careful not to touch her. I would never let anyone hurt you. You can't promise that, she said, turning to face him. You're a soldier. You follow orders. Someday, probably soon, you'll be transferred or shipped home, and I'll still be here. And what then? Do I become just a memory? A story you tell about the German girl you knew during the war? No, he said fiercely. You could never be just a memory, Greta. He took a deep breath. I'm in love with you. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but it's true. And if you'll have me, I want to find a way to make this work. I want to bring you home with me. I want to give you a future. Tears streamed down Greta's face. I'm in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying so hard not to be, but I am, and it terrifies me. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hands. Then let's be terrified together. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, a question rather than a demand. Greta felt something break open inside her, years of fear and grief and loneliness flooding out, replaced by something warm and bright and hopeful. They spent the evening talking, making careful plans, discussing the obstacles they would face. Morrison explained the process for soldier marriages, the paperwork required, the interviews and approvals. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. American soldiers were marrying German women, despite the official discouragement, despite the social stigma, despite all the complications. Are you sure? Greta asked as midnight approached. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your fellow soldiers will judge you. Your family might reject me. The life you imagine for yourself will be completely different. Morrison took her hand, his grip firm and sure. I've never been more certain of anything. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, there will be people who disapprove. But Greta, you're worth it. This, what we have, is worth fighting for. Part 4. The Proposal. Word spread quickly in the small world of occupied Rothenburg. By the time Morrison and Greta returned the next day, rumors were already circulating. The looks Greta received ranged from knowing smiles to cold disapproval. Some women approached her with curiosity, wanting to know how she had captured an American officer's attention. Others turned away, their judgment evident in the set of their shoulders. Morrison's fellow officers had mixed reactions. Some congratulated him, joking about the prettiest girls always going for the officers. Others expressed concern, warning him about the complications of international relationships, the challenges of bringing a German wife to America, the potential impact on his career. Captain Reynolds, Morrison's commanding officer, called him in for a private conversation. I'm not going to forbid this, Reynolds said, leaning back in his chair, but I want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. The paperwork alone will take months. There will be investigations into her background, into her family's involvement with the Nazi Party. If anything questionable turns up, your request will be denied. And even if it's approved, you'll face prejudice back home. People haven't forgotten what the Germans did. With all due respect, sir, Morrison replied, Greta isn't responsible for what her government did any more than I'm responsible for everything my government does. She's a good person who survived terrible circumstances, and I love her. Reynolds sighed. Love, God help us all. All right, Morrison, if you're determined to do this, then do it right. Proper courtship, no living together before marriage. And for God's sake, don't get her pregnant before the paperwork goes through, or you'll never get approval. Morrison left the meeting with mixed feelings. The path ahead would be difficult, but at least it was a path. He had permission to pursue marriage, which was more than many soldiers received. He met Greta that evening at a small park on the edge of town, away from prying eyes. She wore a simple blue dress that she had carefully mended, and flowers in her hair. She looked beautiful and nervous. "How did it go?" she asked. "It went well, all things considered. We have permission to move forward." He took her hands. "But Greta, there's something you need to know. They'll investigate your family. They'll want to know if your father was involved with the Nazi Party, if any of your relatives held positions in the government or military. If they find anything problematic, they could deny our marriage application." Greta's face paled. "My father was a soldier. He didn't have a choice about serving. But he was never a party member. He hated Hitler, actually. He used to say," her voice broke, "he used to say that Hitler would be the death of Germany. He was right." "What about other relatives?" "My uncle, my father's brother. He was in the SS. The words came out in a rush, heavy with shame. "I never knew him well. He died in Russia in 1943, but he believed in it all. The ideology, the hatred. My father broke off contact with him years before the war ended." Morrison absorbed this information carefully. An SS uncle was problematic, but if Greta and her immediate family had no direct involvement, it might be manageable. "We'll deal with it," he said firmly. "We'll be honest about everything. That's the best approach." Over the following weeks, they embarked on what could only be described as a peculiar courtship. They spent their days working together, professional and proper. In the evenings, Morrison would call for Greta at her home, bringing small gifts, chocolates, cigarettes to trade, once a precious orange that Greta had divided among her family, savoring each segment like treasure, and they would walk through the town, talking about everything and nothing. Morrison told her stories about America, about the wide skies and endless possibilities, about cities where buildings reached toward the clouds, and the frontier spirit that still animated the culture. Greta told him about Germany before the war, about the literature and philosophy, the music and art, the rich cultural heritage that had been perverted by the Nazis. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting in the back pew, trying to ignore the stares. They went to the occasional movie showing at the American base, watching films that showed Greta a glimpse of the country she might soon call home. They picnicked in the countryside, finding spots where the war's destruction was hidden by new growth, where they could pretend the world was normal and whole. And slowly, carefully, Morrison began to introduce Greta to other American soldiers and their German girlfriends and fiancés. There was a small community of such couples, bound together by their shared experience of crossing enemy lines for love. Some relationships were clearly transactional, destined to end when the soldiers shipped out, but others seemed genuine, built on real affection and mutual respect. Greta found particular friendship with Anna, a woman from Munich who was engaged to Sergeant Davies. Anna was practical and worldly, having survived worse privations than Greta during the war years. "Don't let them make you feel ashamed," Anna told her one afternoon as they helped prepare food for an engagement party. "Yes, we're with American soldiers. Yes, some people will judge us, but we're survivors. We're doing what we need to do to build new lives. And if we found love in the process, then we're luckier than most." "Aren't you afraid?" Greta asked. "Of going to America? Of being strangers in a strange land?" "Terrified," Anna admitted cheerfully, "but I'm more afraid of staying here, of living the rest of my life in the ruins of what was. At least in America, there's hope. Here, there's just memory and ghosts." In August, Morrison officially proposed. He planned it carefully, taking Greta to the same park where they had first acknowledged their feelings. The summer evening was warm, the air filled with the scent of flowers and grass. He had obtained special permission to have a picnic dinner prepared from the officers' mess, and they spread a blanket on the grass, eating better food than Greta had tasted in years. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Morrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Greta Hoffman," he said, his voice slightly shaking with emotion, "you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. You've shown me that love can cross any boundary, overcome any obstacle. Will you marry me? Will you come to America and build a life with me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful. Greta felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, James, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and then kissed her as the sun set on their old lives and rose on their new future together. Part 5. Facing Opposition. The engagement brought their relationship into sharp focus for both communities. Among the Americans, reactions were mixed, but generally positive. Morrison was well liked, and most of his fellow soldiers wished him happiness, even if they privately thought he was crazy to take on the complications of a German bride. In the German community, however, the response was harsher. Greta found herself increasingly isolated from her former friends and neighbors. Women who had spoken to her cordially now crossed the street to avoid her. Anonymous notes were slipped under her door, calling her a traitor and worse. Once, she found "Ami whore" painted on her family's fence. Her mother faced her own share of judgment. At the market, other women would whisper just loud enough for her to hear, speculating about what kind of mother raised a daughter who would betray her country for American chocolate and cigarettes. Frau Hoffmann endured it all with stoic grace, but Greta could see the toll it took. One evening, she found her mother crying quietly in the kitchen. "Mama, I'm so sorry," Greta said, kneeling beside her chair. "I never meant to bring the shame on you." "Shame?" Her mother looked at her with fierce eyes. "There is no shame in love. There is no shame in choosing life over death, hope over despair. Those people out there, they're angry because they're afraid. The world they knew is gone, and they don't know how to live in this new one. But you do, Greta. You're brave enough to embrace the future, even when it's uncertain. I'm proud of you." "But what about you? What will you do when I leave?" Her mother smiled sadly. "I'll manage. I always have. And knowing you're safe, knowing you're happy, that will be enough for me." The conversation left Greta torn. She loved James, wanted the life he offered, but the thought of leaving her mother alone in devastated Germany was agonizing. Morrison, sensing her struggle, made a suggestion. "What if your mother came with us? We could sponsor her. It would take longer, more paperwork, but it's possible." Greta broached the subject with her mother, who immediately refused. "This is your new life, not mine," Frau Hoffmann said firmly. "I'm too old to start over in a foreign country. My language is German. My memories are here. I'll stay. But you must go. You must take this chance for happiness." The paperwork for their marriage proceeded slowly. As promised, Morrison submitted forms, attended interviews, provided documentation. The investigation into Greta's background was thorough and invasive. She had to account for her whereabouts during the entire war, explain her father's service, acknowledge her uncle's SS membership. The interview was conducted by a stern American officer who regarded Greta with undisguised suspicion. "Your uncle was SS," he stated flatly. "He participated in some of the worst atrocities of the war." "Yes," Greta said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But I barely knew him. My father cut off contact with him before the war even began. We had no involvement with his activities." "But you knew what was happening? The camps? The murders?" This was the question Greta had been dreading, the one she had been asking herself for months. "We knew something was happening," she said carefully. "We heard rumors, but the full extent? No, I don't think we understood the full extent until after the war ended. And even the rumors? We told ourselves they couldn't be true. We told ourselves no civilized nation could do such things. We were wrong to ignore what we suspected. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life." The officer studied her for a long moment. "Do you regret that Germany lost the war?" "No," Greta said, without hesitation. "Germany needed to lose. We needed to be stopped. What my country did was evil, and I'm grateful that it ended, even though the cost was terrible." After several tense minutes of additional questioning, the officer dismissed her. She left the interview shaking, uncertain whether she had passed or failed this crucial test. Morrison was waiting outside. "How did it go?" "I don't know," Greta admitted. "I told the truth. That's all I could do." 2 weeks later, they received news. The marriage application had been approved. They could marry as soon as the necessary arrangements were made. The relief was overwhelming. Morrison picked Greta up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy and disbelief. They had cleared the first major hurdle. Now they just had to make it official. Part 6. The Wedding. They set the wedding date for early October, giving them time to make arrangements. It would be a small ceremony, held at the base chapel with the military chaplain presiding. The guest list was limited, a few of Morrison's fellow officers, some of the other couples in similar situations, and Greta's mother. Greta had no wedding dress, no money for such luxuries. But Anna and the other German fiancés pulled together their resources, finding a simple white dress that had been preserved from before the war, altering it to fit Greta's slim frame. It wasn't the elaborate gown she might have dreamed of as a girl, but it was clean and pretty, and when she looked at herself in the mirror on the morning of her wedding, she felt beautiful. Her mother helped her dress, fingers fumbling with the small buttons. I wish your father could see this, Frau Hoffmann said, her voice thick with emotion. He would have been so proud of you, and he would have liked James. He always appreciated men of substance, men with character. I wish he were here too, Greta said, feeling the familiar ache of her father's absence. There were so many moments she wanted to share with him, so many things she wished she could tell him. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. Morrison stood at the altar in his dress uniform, his face serious and tender as he watched Greta walk down the aisle on her mother's arm. The chaplain spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Morrison's voice was strong and clear. I, James Morrison, take you, Greta Hoffmann, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, for as long as we both shall live. Greta's voice shook slightly, but her words were just as certain. I, Greta Hoffmann, take you, James Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, stand by you, for as long as we both shall live. They exchanged simple gold bands. The chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, and when Morrison kissed his bride, Greta felt as though she were sealing not just a marriage, but a pact with the future, a commitment to leave behind the ruins of the past and build something new and beautiful from the ashes. The reception was held in the officers' mess, a modest celebration with cake and coffee and the precious luxury of music from a small band. Morrison and Greta danced their first dance as husband and wife, moving slowly to an American song Greta didn't know, but whose melody spoke of hope and homecoming. Sergeant Davies, who had become Morrison's closest friend, stood to make a toast. To James and Greta, he said, raising his glass. They say love conquers all, and maybe that's just romantic nonsense. But if any couple can make it work against all odds, it's these two. May your lives together be long and happy, and may you always remember this moment, the moment you chose each other, despite everything that said you shouldn't. There were cheers and applause. Frau Hoffmann cried quietly, torn between joy for her daughter and sorrow at the impending separation. Anna whispered to Greta that she and Davies had set their own wedding date for November, and they would be following soon to America. As the evening drew to a close, Morrison and Greta prepared to leave for their wedding night. Morrison had secured a room at a small hotel in a nearby town, away from the base, away from everyone who knew them. It would be their first night alone as husband and wife. Before they left, Greta embraced her mother one last time. I'll write to you every week, Greta promised. And as soon as we're settled, we'll send for you, I promise. Live your life, my darling, her mother said. That's all I want for you. Live fully, love completely, and don't look back with regret. Part 7. Building a New Life. The months following their wedding were a strange period of transition. Greta moved into Morrison's quarters on the base, a small apartment that was luxury compared to her family's damaged house. She had regular meals, hot water, heat, comforts she had almost forgotten existed. But adjustment was harder than she expected. She was now living entirely in the American sphere, surrounded by English speakers, navigating foreign customs and expectations. The other German war brides became her lifeline, women who understood the peculiar displacement of loving the enemy, of being caught between two worlds. They formed a sort of informal sisterhood, meeting regularly to share news, advice, and support. They taught each other English phrases, discussed American customs, prepared each other for the journey that lay ahead. Some were going to New York, others to California, still others to small towns scattered across the vast American landscape. My fiancé says his town has never seen a foreigner before, one woman said with nervous laughter. I'll probably be the local curiosity. At least you speak English, another replied. I know maybe 50 words. I'm terrified I won't understand anyone. Greta, with her relatively fluent English, often found herself helping the others, translating letters from their fiancés, explaining American idioms, offering what comfort she could. Morrison, for his part, was a patient and considerate husband. He understood that Greta was navigating a complete upheaval of her life, and he gave her space to grieve what she was losing even as she embraced what she was gaining. He brought her books in German from the library, made sure she had time to write long letters to her mother, and never pressured her to abandon her German identity even as she adapted to her new American one. Their marriage was genuine and growing stronger. They talked late into the night about their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. Morrison spoke of returning to teaching, perhaps getting a position at a university. Greta dreamed of continuing her own education, maybe even finishing her teaching credentials. "Do you think it's possible," she asked one night, curled against his side, "that I could teach in America? Would anyone want their children taught by a German?" "It might take time," Morrison admitted honestly. "The war is still fresh in everyone's minds, but things will change. And yes, I think you could teach. You're brilliant, Greta. Any school would be lucky to have you." In December, Morrison received his orders. He would be shipping back to the States in February, and Greta would follow within a few weeks on a transport ship carrying other war brides. The separation would be brief, but the finality of it, the knowledge that they were truly leaving Europe behind, hit Greta with unexpected force. She visited her mother as often as she could during those final weeks, trying to memorize every detail of her face, the sound of her voice, the way she moved through the house that held a lifetime of memories. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," Greta said on one of these visits. "Promise me you'll eat properly, that you'll ask for help if you need it." "I promise," her mother assured her. "And you must promise me something in return. Promise me you won't spend your new life looking backward. Honor your past, yes, but live in your present, build your future." The farewell was agonizing. Greta clung to her mother, both women weeping, neither wanting to let go. Morrison stood back respectfully, giving them privacy for their grief. "I love you, Mama," Greta whispered. "Thank you for everything you've given me, for everything you've taught me. I love you too, my darling girl. Now go and be happy." Morrison's departure in February was equally difficult, though they knew their separation would be brief. He kissed her goodbye at the train station, surrounded by other soldiers saying their own farewells. "I'll have everything ready for you," he promised. "A home, a job, a whole new life waiting. Just get on that ship and come to me." "I will," Greta promised. "Nothing could keep me from you." Part 8. The Journey. In March of 1946, Greta boarded the SS Marine Flasher along with over 500 other war brides and their children. The ship was crowded, noisy, and uncomfortable, but there was an undercurrent of excitement among the women. They were heading toward their futures, toward the men they loved, toward a country that promised new beginnings. The voyage took 2 weeks, and Greta spent much of it helping other brides who were seasick, frightened, or struggling with their limited English. She organized informal English lessons, translated announcements, and tried to prepare the women for what they would encounter. "America is different from what we are used to," she told a group gathered in the common area one evening. "Everything is bigger, faster, more abundant. Don't be surprised by the wealth, by how much food there is, by how casual everything seems. And remember, we are the ones who have to adapt. We chose to go to them." Anna, who had married Sergeant Davies in November as planned, had become Greta's closest friend during the voyage. They spent hours talking about their hopes and fears, comforting each other during moments of doubt. "What if we don't fit in?" Anna asked one night as they stood on deck, watching the stars. "What if we're always foreigners, always suspect?" "Then we'll be foreigners together," Greta replied. "We'll create our own community, support each other. We survived the war, Anna. We can survive anything." The first sight of New York Harbor was overwhelming. The Statue of Liberty rose from the water, a symbol of welcome and hope that made many of the women cry. The city beyond was a forest of skyscrapers, more buildings reaching toward the sky than Greta had imagined possible. Processing through immigration was lengthy and bureaucratic. Each woman had to present her papers, undergo a medical examination, prove she was legally married to an American serviceman. Some women were held back for additional questioning, their papers not quite in order. Greta passed through without incident, her documentation thorough thanks to Morrison's careful preparation. And then, finally, she was through, stepping into the arrivals hall where hundreds of men waited for their brides. She spotted Morrison immediately. He stood near the back, taller than many of those around him, holding a bouquet of flowers. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile of pure joy. Greta ran to him, their embrace witnessed by hundreds of strangers who nevertheless cheered and applauded. This was the happy ending they had all come for, the reunion that made the journey worthwhile. "Welcome to America, Mrs. Morrison," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me home," Greta replied. Part 9. America. Ohio was nothing like Bavaria. The landscape was flatter, the towns more spread out, the people more casual in their manners. Morrison's hometown of Millersburg was small and insular, a farming community where most families had lived for generations. James had secured a small house on the edge of town, a simple two-bedroom structure with a garden and a view of fields stretching to the horizon. He had furnished it with the basics, leaving room for Greta to add her own touches. "It's not much," he said, as he carried her over the threshold, following the American custom, "but it's ours." "It's perfect," Greta said honestly. After years of scarcity and destruction, the simple abundance of America was almost shocking. The kitchen had a refrigerator filled with food. The bathroom had hot running water. The stores in town overflowed with goods she hadn't seen in years. But fitting into the community was harder than she anticipated. Morrison's family welcomed her politely, but with evident reservations. His mother was kind but cool, clearly struggling with the idea of her son marrying a German. His father said little, his silence more telling than words. At the Sunday dinner, where Greta was formally introduced to the extended family, the conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. Morrison's aunt finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "So, Greta, what did you do during the war?" "I survived," Greta answered simply. "I worked in a factory. I stood in bread lines. I helped care for wounded soldiers in the hospital. I did what everyone did. I tried to live through each day." "And your family? Were they involved?" The implication was clear. "My father was a soldier who died fighting. My mother is a widow trying to rebuild her life. We were ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances." Greta met her aunt's eyes steadily. "I can't change where I was born, or what my country did. I can only tell you that I'm grateful Germany lost, grateful the killing stopped, and grateful that your son gave me a chance at a new life." The honesty seemed to diffuse some of the tension. Morrison's mother reached across the table to pat Greta's hand. "That can't have been easy to say. Thank you for being honest with us." The town itself was more mixed in its reception. Some people were curious and welcoming, excited to meet someone from so far away. Others were openly hostile, still raw from the war, unable to separate Greta from the German war machine. She faced regular small cruelties, being ignored at the grocery store, whispered comments as she passed on the street, exclusion from social gatherings. The local newspaper ran a story about her arrival that was neutral in tone, but emphasized her German origins in a way that felt accusatory. Morrison stood by her through it all, defending her to anyone who questioned her presence, making it clear that any insult to his wife was an insult to him. His loyalty helped, but it couldn't entirely shield her from the prejudice. Greta found solace in letters from her mother and from Anna, who had settled in Pennsylvania and faced similar challenges. They wrote frequently, sharing their experiences, offering advice and encouragement. "It's getting easier," Anna wrote in one letter. "The people here are starting to see me as more than just the German woman. I'm becoming the lady who makes excellent apple strudel, the one who always helps at church functions. Give it time, Greta. We're winning them over, one person at a time." Greta took this advice to heart. She joined the local Lutheran church, volunteered for community projects, and worked hard to be a good neighbor. Slowly, gradually, the walls began to come down. When she helped nurse a neighbor's child through a fever, word spread about her kindness. When she contributed her baking to a church fundraiser, people complimented her skills. When she showed genuine interest in learning American customs and traditions, some of the older women began to warm to her. Morrison had returned to teaching at the local high school, and Greta enrolled in classes at a nearby college, working toward finishing her teaching credentials. The coursework was challenging, both because of the material and because she was doing it in her second language, but she persevered. One of her professors, Dr. Harriet Miller, took particular interest in her. "You have a unique perspective, Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Miller said one day after class. "You've lived through things most Americans can only imagine. That experience, difficult as it was, gives you empathy and understanding that will make you an excellent teacher." If I'm ever allowed to teach," Greta said, with more bitterness than she intended, "I'm not sure any school will hire me." "Then we'll have to change their minds," Dr. Miller said firmly. "The world is moving forward, Greta. We can't let prejudice and fear hold us back." Part 10. Integration and Acceptance. As 1946 turned into 1947, Greta's life in America began to feel less like exile and more like home. She completed her teaching credentials and, with Dr. Miller's strong recommendation, secured a position teaching German language and literature at a private school in a nearby town. The headmaster who hired her was a progressive man who believed in reconciliation and education. "The war is over," he told her during the interview. "We need to teach the next generation to see beyond nationalism and hatred." Who better to teach German culture and language than someone who understands both its beauty and its capacity for darkness? Teaching gave Greta a renewed sense of purpose. Her students were curious about her background, asking questions that were sometimes uncomfortable but usually genuine. She tried to be honest with them, sharing her experiences without shying away from the difficult truths. Was everyone in Germany a Nazi? One student asked bluntly. No, Greta answered carefully, but we were complicit in ways that varied. Some actively participated in evil, others looked away when they should have spoken up, others, especially toward the end, resisted in small ways, and many, especially children like you, simply tried to survive. Understanding how a nation falls into such darkness, that's important so we can prevent it from happening again. At home, her marriage with Morrison continued to deepen. They had settled into comfortable patterns, morning coffee together before work, evening walks around their property, lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper in bed. They talked about starting a family, though Greta was hesitant. What if I'm not a good mother? She worried. What if I pass on my trauma to our children? Then we'll work through it together, Morrison assured her. Greta, you're one of the strongest people I know. Our children will be lucky to have you. In the spring of 1948, Greta discovered she was pregnant. The news was both joyful and terrifying. She wrote to her mother, sharing the news and wishing desperately that Frau Hoffmann could be there for the birth. Her mother's reply was warm and encouraging. A grandchild, my darling, I'm so happy for you. I wish I could be there to hold this baby, but know that I will love this little one from across the ocean. You will be a wonderful mother. You have so much love to give. The pregnancy was difficult, complicated by morning sickness and anxiety, but Morrison was attentive and supportive, attending every doctor's appointment, reading books on childbirth and child-rearing, preparing the small second bedroom as a nursery. The Morrison family's attitude shifted considerably when they learned about the pregnancy. Morrison's mother visited more frequently, bringing baby clothes she had saved from when her own children were small. His father built a cradle with his own hands, presenting it shyly to Greta. For my grandchild, he said simply, and in those words, Greta heard acceptance at last. In December 1948, Greta gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine Frida. Catherine for Morrison's grandmother, Frida for Greta's mother. The baby was healthy and beautiful, with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. Holding her daughter for the first time, Greta felt a profound sense of hope. This child was truly American, born into freedom and opportunity, unburdened by the past that weighed so heavily on her mother. Catherine would grow up in a peaceful country, with enough food, with education, with choices Greta had never had. She's perfect, Morrison whispered, looking at his wife and daughter with wonder. She's our future, Greta replied. Part 11. Looking Forward. The 1950s brought continued stability and growth. Morrison was promoted to head of the English department at his school. Greta, after taking time off for Catherine's early years, returned to teaching and eventually became chair of the foreign language department at her school. They had 2 more children, a son, Robert, in 1951, and another daughter, Emily, in 1953. The house rang with laughter and chaos, with homework and music lessons, with all the ordinary joys of family life. Greta's English had become almost accentless, though she made sure to speak German with her children, wanting them to maintain a connection to her heritage. She taught them German songs and stories, made traditional German foods for holidays, and told them carefully edited stories about her childhood in Bavaria. The town's attitude toward her had transformed completely. She was no longer the German war bride, but rather Mrs. Morrison, the language teacher, or Catherine's mother, or simply Greta. She had proven herself through years of good citizenship, through her dedication to her students, through her involvement in the community. She had even developed close friendships with local women, including Morrison's mother, who had eventually embraced Greta fully as a daughter-in-law. They bonded over gardening and cooking, over shared concerns about the children, over the ordinary intimacies that build between women who see each other regularly. Still, there were moments when the past reasserted itself. When Catherine came home from school one day in tears because another child had called her, the German girl's daughter, and said her mother's people had killed Americans, Greta felt the old shame and anger rise up. She sat Catherine down and spoke to her honestly. Yes, I was born in Germany, she said. Yes, Germany did terrible things during the war, but I didn't do those things. And neither did your grandmother in Germany or anyone in our family. We were ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times. You are American, Catherine. This is your country, your home. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Morrison filed a complaint with the school, and the issue was addressed, but it reminded them both that the wounds of war healed slowly, and some scars remained for generations. Greta's correspondence with her mother continued faithfully over the years, though Frau Hoffmann had refused all invitations to visit America. "I'm too old to travel so far," she always wrote. "I'm content to know you're happy and to see pictures of my grandchildren growing up." In the winter of 1955, Greta received a telegram informing her that her mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The grief was overwhelming, complicated by the fact that Greta hadn't seen her mother in nearly a decade. She had missed her mother's final years, missed the chance to care for her as she aged, missed saying a proper goodbye. Morrison held her as she wept, understanding that she was mourning not just her mother, but all the losses the war had inflicted, her father, her homeland, her youth, the life she might have had. "She was proud of you," he reminded Greta gently. "She wanted you to have this life. Don't let guilt diminish the gift she gave you." With her mother's death, Greta's last tie to Germany was severed. She was fully American now, by choice and by circumstance. She applied for citizenship, which she had been eligible for years earlier but had delayed, perhaps holding on to some vestige of her German identity. The naturalization ceremony was emotional, surrounded by other immigrants taking the same oath, promising allegiance to their adopted country. When the judge declared her a United States citizen, Morrison squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with pride. Their children, dressed in their Sunday best for the occasion, applauded enthusiastically. Part 12. Reconciliation and Reflection. In 1960, Morrison surprised Greta with an anniversary gift, tickets for the family to visit Germany. He had been saving for years, wanting to show their children where their mother came from, wanting Greta to reconnect with her homeland. The trip was bittersweet. Germany had recovered remarkably from the war's devastation. Cities had been rebuilt, the economy was thriving, and a new generation was coming of age that had no memory of the war. But for Greta, every street held ghosts. They visited Rothenburg, which had been largely restored to its medieval charm. The house where Greta had grown up had been completely renovated, now home to a young family who graciously allowed them to look around. Greta stood in her old bedroom, now painted pink and filled with a little girl's toys, and felt the weight of time and change. They visited her mother's grave, placing flowers on the simple headstone. Greta knelt there for a long time, finally saying the goodbye she hadn't been able to say in person. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me go. Thank you for understanding. I hope I've made you proud." The children were fascinated by everything, the architecture, the food, the language their mother spoke fluently, but they struggled with. They asked endless questions about Greta's childhood, about the war, about what it was like to grow up in such a different place. Catherine, now 11 and startlingly perceptive, asked the hardest question, "Mama, do you ever wish you had stayed here? Do you ever regret leaving?" Greta thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been if things had been different, if there had been no war, if I had finished my education here, if I had married a German man and raised my children in Bavaria. But then I remember that I wouldn't have you, or Robert, or Emily. I wouldn't have your father. I wouldn't have the life I've built. So no, I don't regret leaving. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, but not the choice itself." They also visited Anna and her husband, who had returned to Germany on a similar pilgrimage. The two women embraced with the fierce affection of those who had shared a unique journey. "We made it," Anna said, laughing and crying at once. "We actually made it." "We did," Greta agreed. "Against all odds, we built good lives." On their last day in Germany, Morrison and Greta walked through the park where he had proposed 15 years earlier. It looked different now. The war damage repaired, new trees planted, children playing where soldiers had once camped. "Do you ever regret it?" Greta asked, echoing their daughter's question. "Taking on all the complications of marrying me?" Morrison pulled her close. "Not for a single moment. You're the best decision I ever made, Greta. These past 15 years with you, they've been the happiest of my life." Part 13. Legacy. As the 1960s progressed, the world continued to change. The children grew up, each carving their own path. Catherine went to college to study international relations, inspired by her mother's story to work toward better understanding between nations. Robert became an engineer, pragmatic and steady like his father. Emily, the youngest, showed artistic talent and dreamed of becoming a painter. Greta and Morrison grew into middle age together, their love deepening with time. They had weathered challenges, financial struggles, health scares, the normal difficulties of raising 3 children, but as they had weathered them together, their partnership strong and sure. Greta continued teaching, and over the years, she taught hundreds of students German language and literature. She made sure they understood not just the grammar and vocabulary, but the culture, the history, the complexity of a nation that had produced both Goethe and Hitler, both Beethoven and the Holocaust. We must learn from history, she told every class. We must understand how ordinary people can be led to do terrible things, and we must recognize the signs so we can resist when it happens again, because it will happen again, in different forms, in different places, unless each generation commits to being vigilant. Some of her former students went on to become teachers themselves, or diplomats, or scholars of German history. They credited Greta with opening their eyes to the complexity of the world, to the importance of empathy, even for former enemies. In 1975, Morrison retired from teaching, and Greta followed suit a year later. They had grandchildren now. Catherine had married and had 2 children of her own. Robert had 3, and Emily had 1. The house that had once been so full was quiet now, but it filled regularly with visiting grandchildren who loved hearing Oma Greta's stories and eating her German pastries. Greta had also become something of an informal counselor to other immigrant women in the area as immigration patterns shifted and more foreigners arrived in their small Ohio town. Greta made a point of reaching out, offering friendship and advice to those navigating the challenges of adapting to American life. "It's hard at first," she would tell them. "You'll feel like you're between worlds, not quite German anymore, but not quite American either. But eventually, you'll realize you're both. You can honor where you came from while embracing where you are. It's not betrayal, it's growth." In 1980, on their 35th wedding anniversary, Morrison organized a surprise party for Greta. The house was filled with family, friends, former students, and colleagues. People stood up to share stories about how Greta had touched their lives, her kindness, her wisdom, her courage. One former student, now a professor of history, said, "Mrs. Morrison taught me that history isn't just dates and events. It's people making choices, often impossible choices, and then living with the consequences. She taught me that we can learn from even the darkest chapters if we're brave enough to face them honestly. She's a living example of how love and courage can transcend even war." Greta, embarrassed by the attention but deeply moved, stood to respond. "When I was a young woman in Germany," she began, "I thought my life was over. My country was destroyed. My future was uncertain, and I couldn't imagine how anything good could come from such devastation. But then I met James, and he showed me that even in the darkest times, there is hope. Even between enemies, there can be understanding and love." She looked at her husband, her eyes bright with tears. "These 35 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You took a chance on a German girl with nothing to offer but her heart, and you gave me everything: a home, a family, a country, a future. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. You showed me what true love looks like." Morrison stood and embraced her as their family and friends applauded. Their children watched with proud smiles, understanding perhaps for the first time the full magnitude of what their parents had overcome to create the family they all took for granted. Epilogue, full circle. In the summer of 1985, Greta returned to Germany one last time, now accompanied by Morrison and all 3 of their adult children with their families. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a final closing of circles. They visited Rothenburg again, which had become a popular tourist destination, its medieval character preserved and restored. The town square where American soldiers had set up camp 40 years earlier now hosted souvenir shops and restaurants serving traditional German food to American tourists. Greta stood in that square, holding her first great-grandchild, Catherine's daughter's son, and marveled at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. "This is where I first saw your great-grandfather," she told the baby, who couldn't possibly understand, but seemed to listen anyway. "Right here, where you're standing. I was afraid he was a stranger and we were supposed to be enemies, but we saw each other, really saw each other, and that changed everything." The family visited the cemetery where both of Greta's parents were buried. The children and grandchildren laid flowers, paying respects to ancestors they had never known, but whose choices had made their lives possible. That evening, they had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Tauber River Valley. The conversation was lively, mixing English and German, spanning 3 generations, connecting past and present. Robert raised his glass in a toast. To Oma and Opa, he said, for having the courage to love across enemy lines, for building a bridge when others saw only barriers, for showing us that family isn't just about where you're born, it's about who you choose to love and stand beside. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and later, as the sun set over the Bavarian countryside, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Morrison and Greta walked along the city walls, just as they had done 40 years earlier, when they were young and in love and terrified of the future. "We did good, didn't we?" Greta asked, leaning into her husband's familiar warmth. "We did very good," Morrison agreed. 3 wonderful children, 8 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, and counting. Decades of teaching and touching lives. A love that lasted. Yes, I'd say we did very good indeed. "I'm glad you asked me to marry you," Greta said softly. "I'm glad I said yes." "Me too," Morrison replied. "Every single day, me too." They stood there together as the stars began to appear, an American man and his German wife, their lives woven together into a story of love conquering hate, hope overcoming despair, and the power of human connection to transcend even the deepest divides. Behind them lay 40 years of marriage, of challenges overcome and joys shared. Before them lay whatever time remained, to be spent in the same companionship and love that had sustained them through everything. And around them, their family, American children with German heritage, a living testament to the possibility of reconciliation, of building something beautiful from the ruins of war. Greta thought of her mother, who had given her blessing all those years ago to embrace an uncertain future. She thought of her father, who had hated the war but served anyway. She thought of all the people who had helped her along the way, Anna and the other war brides. Dr. Miller, who had believed in her, the neighbors who had eventually accepted her, the students who had learned from her. Most of all, she thought of the young American lieutenant who had seen past her nationality to the person she was, who had loved her despite every barrier between them, who had built a life with her that exceeded anything she could have imagined in those dark days of 1945. "Thank you," she whispered to Morrison, to the universe, to whatever forces had brought them together and kept them together through 40 years of marriage. "Thank you," Morrison echoed, understanding without needing explanation. And in that moment, standing on the walls of an ancient German town, surrounded by their family, Greta Morrison knew that she was finally, completely home, not in Germany, not in America, but in the life she and James had built together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of love at a time. The war had tried to destroy everything, but love had proven stronger. And that, Greta thought, as she watched her great-grandchild toddle toward them with outstretched arms, was the only story that mattered in the end.